Welcome to the debate. What if I told you that the millions of dollars your company is currently spending to build the perfect collaborative digital workspace
Right.
is actually the exact thing that's driving your employees to quit?
It sounds completely counterintuitive, doesn't it? I mean, you buy the software, you schedule the check-ins, you build all this infrastructure,
Yeah,
and yet people still just walk out the door.
exactly. And the stakes for figuring out why this is happening, they've really never been higher. We are currently facing this massive retention challenge in knowledge-intensive organizations.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, in the United States alone, annual turnover costs have just soared past $630 billion.
Wow.
Yeah. And if you look at India's booming IT sector, attrition rates there routinely blow past 20%. So industry analysts, they aren't just calling this a turnover problem anymore.
Right. It's not just a standard metric.
No, they are explicitly calling it a talent churn crisis.
And that loss, it really isn't just a line item on a spreadsheet, When knowledgeable employees leave, they take with them what we call tacit expertise.
Right. Tacit expertise.
Yeah, which this isn't the stuff you can just easily write down in a manual or a handbook. It is the nuanced, kind of contextual understanding of how things actually get done.
Yes.
Along with, the invisible network of relationships they've built over years. Once they leave, that knowledge simply vanishes.
It just evaporates.
Exactly. It never gets captured in those formal databases.
Which brings us to the core of today's discussion. We are examining Jonathan H. Westover's analysis of a really pivotal 2026 study by Panda and colleagues.
Mm-hmm.
And this research explicitly proves that psychological safety is the crucial mediating factor between knowledge-sharing networks and employee retention.
Okay.
Basically, it is not enough to just, give employees access to an intranet or a wiki.
Right. Just handing them a login isn't going to cut it.
Exactly. The relational and emotional infrastructure supporting that exchange is what actually keeps people from quitting.
Now, the data on that outcome is incredibly clear, but the application, like how you actually create that safety, that is where things get highly complicated.
Highly complicated. And that is the central disagreement we are exploring today. Can psychological safety and a genuine, knowledge-sharing connection be successfully engineered through formal top-down organizational infrastructure?
Right.
Or do they fundamentally depend on organic, unstructured, and unmanaged environments? I take the position that structured, intentional organizational design is absolutely necessary to manufacture connection in the modern workplace.
And I take the opposing view. I argue that true relational safety thrives on organic, spontaneous interaction. And honestly, it's very often hindered, if not outright destroyed, by top-down corporate engineering.
Well, let's take a step back and look at why I think we absolutely have to build these formal structures.
Okay.
We are living in an era defined by permanent hybrid work models, right? And continuous knowledge obsolescence.
Sure.
Technical skills depreciate faster than ever before. So in this environment, leaving psychological safety and human connection to chance is, frankly, it's a complete dereliction of organizational duty.
Dereliction of duty. That's a strong phrase.
It is, but I stand by it. For years, companies have relied on what I would call transactional knowledge management. They build massive databases, drop in some search functions, and just, expect people to use them.
Right. The build it and they will come mentality.
Exactly. But imagine an employee staring at a blinking cursor on a massive corporate wiki. Why doesn't the employee type?
Well,
because of fear. Transactional systems fail because they lack a built architecture of connection. The 2026 Panda study explicitly demonstrates that we must formally design pathways for safety, but because the organic hallway conversation is dead for the distributed workforce. If an organization does not actively engineer structured mentoring, optimize hybrid schedules, and mandate connection points, professional isolation will inevitably destroy retention.
Okay, I agree that the data on psychological safety is indisputable. Everyone wants to feel safe. But the conclusions drawn by corporate architects often miss the fundamental nature of what safety actually is.
How so?
Well, the Panda study explicitly highlights the subjective, perceptual experience of isolation. It points to the power of informal collaboration as a crucial moderator. True relational safety cannot be mandated.
But you can create the space for it.
But it certainly cannot be scheduled through a calendar app. Safety is an emergent property. It comes from shared physical or conceptual proximity. Think about the difference between being told to, share your feelings in a mandatory 9 a.m. Zoom meeting
Okay.
versus naturally complaining about a broken code build over a cup of coffee.
Right, but
When you try to formalize it, when you mandate vulnerability through top-down initiatives, you often destroy the very authenticity that makes genuine knowledge sharing possible. Connection is fundamentally a human experience, not a mechanical output of an engineered system.
okay, since we both agree that the shift to distributed work has fundamentally altered how professionals connect, I think the logical place to start unpacking this is how organizations should actually bridge this geographical divide.
Sure.
I argue for the absolute necessity of formal digital and physical architecture to combat isolation. Look at GitLab.
Okay, GitLab.
They operate fully remote with over 2,000 employees spread across 65 countries. You cannot rely on organic emergence when your workforce is separated by oceans and 12 time zones.
That's a fair point on distance.
Right? So to fix this, they use highly structured mechanisms. They have algorithmically randomized coffee chats, extensive documentation of communication norms, and mandatory show-and-tell sessions. The mechanism here is that the structure removes the cognitive load of having to bravely reach out to a stranger. The system just does it for you.
Right.
And the result? Their voluntary turnover is 30% below the technology industry average.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Or look at Salesforce implementing structured Ohana groups to formalize intentional communities. They reduced feelings of professional isolation by 23%. This proves that structural architecture works because it forces the connection that distance naturally prevents.
I come at it from a different way.
Okay.
While those statistics are impressive on the surface, scheduled interactions lack the multiplexity and permeability of genuine knowledge-sharing networks.
Multiplexity?
Let me unpack those terms. Multiplexity is the layered nature of how we connect. It means I know you as a coder, but I also know you as a parent, and I know you're a terrible bowler.
Hey, I resent that.
Just an example. But permeability is how easily ideas flow across the boundaries of different departments. That layered, porous connection, it simply doesn't happen naturally in a heavily structured, algorithmically assigned 15-minute Zoom coffee chat.
I mean, it's a start, isn't it?
Consider the Allen curve. This is an architectural principle noting that employees working within 25 feet of each other have 4 times as many interactions as those just 75 feet apart.
Okay.
The mechanism there is spontaneous friction. You cannot replicate that kind of proximity with an algorithm. Look at Pixar's famous spatial design.
Oh, right, with the bathrooms.
Exactly. They deliberately place the bathrooms and mailboxes in a central atrium that forces unstructured physical cross-pollination. People bump into each other. They share ideas voluntarily without an agenda.
Yeah.
That unstructured spontaneity is vastly superior to a scheduled digital meeting because it completely removes the pressure of performance.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective.
Sure.
I view this through the lens of urban planning.
Urban planning?
Yeah. A city requires a formal grid infrastructure, right? Roads, zoning laws, utility lines. You need all of that for organic, safe neighborhoods to emerge.
Okay, I follow.
You cannot have the organic neighborhood without the rigid grid underneath it. You praise Pixar's building design as a triumph of the organic, but a corporate headquarters with centrally planned bathrooms is a massive top-down structural intervention.
Well,
Ed Catmull and the leadership team engineered that space to force interaction. Think about a traffic light in a city. You wouldn't tell citizens to organically invent a traffic light to avoid a car crash.
right.
The formal structure of the light absorbs the risk so the human doesn't have to. How is engineering a physical space fundamentally different from engineering a digital space with rules and rhythms to force interaction and absorb social risk?
It is fundamentally different because of the perception of autonomy.
Autonomy?
Yes, when I walk to a central mailbox at Pixar, my primary objective is getting the mail. The interaction I have with a colleague on the way is entirely voluntary, serendipitous, and unmanaged. I am in control.
Okay.
When I log into a mandatory algorithm-assigned coffee chat, the interaction itself is the objective, and it is being monitored by a system. That shifts the interaction from being informal collaboration,
Which we know is important.
right, which the Panda study shows is the critical amplifier of psychological safety. It shifts it from that into formal compliance.
Okay, but let's say you've built the perfect digital water cooler or the ultimate Pixar atrium.
Right.
Share tacit knowledge. If an employee bumps into their manager, but they know performance reviews are coming up, they aren't going to admit a mistake, no matter how nice the atrium is.
That's true.
So, how much does the actual leadership climate override the physical or digital space? This is why I champion proactive, formal leadership training and structural interventions.
Such as?
Well, a prime example is Unilever. They rolled out inclusive leadership training to 15,000 global managers.
Wow. 15,000?
Yeah, massive scale. They didn't just hope safety would magically emerge in the cafeteria. They explicitly trained for it.
Okay.
Similarly, under Satya Nadella, Microsoft executed a deliberate cultural shift to a learn-it-all culture. Leaders now use structural conversation norms like formal premortems.
Premortems.
Yeah, so before a project even begins, the team is forced to sit down and imagine how it might fail. The mechanism here is brilliant. It provides a psychological shield.
How does it do that?
It gives employees explicit, formal permission to voice concerns without looking like a pessimist or a troublemaker. The structure absorbs the social risk.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why.
Okay.
Top-down directives to, be vulnerable or share your failures almost always create performative safety, not psychological safety.
Performative.
Yes, if a manager goes to a 3-day training seminar and returns with a laminated checklist of inclusive behaviors, the employees see right through it.
Well, I wouldn't say they see through it.
It becomes just another corporate box to check. True safety requires dismantling evaluative corporate structures rather than adding new training modules on top of them.
Dismantling them?
Exactly. Look at Adobe. They didn't add a new vulnerability training program. They completely blew up the annual performance review process in favor of informal check-ins.
Right. That was huge news when they did that.
It was, because by separating learning from formal performance evaluation, they removed the evaluative pressure. Think about the psychological mechanism at play here.
Okay.
When every interaction feels evaluative, your cognitive load is consumed by self-protection. You cannot train an employee to feel safe while simultaneously grading their performance on a forced curve.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently.
Okay, how so?
Evaluation system that is actually less safe because the rules are now unwritten.
I wouldn't say less safe.
But formal structures, as flawed and annoying as they can be, provide predictability. And predictability is a massive core component of psychological safety.
Sure, predictability helps.
Right. If my manager is assessing me through unstructured check-ins, I have no objective rubric to rely on. I'm left guessing what they actually want. The explicit structures, like that mandated premortem I mentioned, act as a protective shield. The employee isn't being a difficult contrarian by pointing out flaws. They're simply following the mandated process.
I disagree that removing annual reviews inherently creates an invisible, terrifying evaluation system.
But it could.
What it actually does is shift the evaluation from a high-stakes, anxiety-inducing, once-a-year judgment to a continuous low-stakes dialogue.
Okay.
The Panda study makes it incredibly clear that safety mediates retention, specifically because of how employees subjectively experience their environment.
Yes, subjectively.
If the formal structure is a protective shield, as you say, it only proves my point. The corporate environment itself is inherently hostile. An organically safe environment doesn't require a shield.
That's a bit utopian, don't you think?
Not at all. When you separate learning from evaluation, you lower the cognitive load of fear. You allow employees to say, hey, I don't know how to do this, without the creeping terror that this admission of ignorance will show up on a formalized HR document 6 months later.
I hear you. And if you're listening to this and you work at a small creative agency, you might be nodding along thinking you can maintain that delicate, unmanaged dialogue.
Right.
But what happens when we look at massive scale? We are talking about the reality of India's IT sector, Tata Consultancy Services has over 600,000 employees.
Yeah, that is huge.
Infosys has over 300,000 employees. You simply cannot rely on low-stakes, unmanaged dialogue at that scale. Knowledge sharing must be systematized, digitized, and incentivized.
Incentivized how?
Well, TCS implemented the GNOME platform, and Infosys built iEngage. These platforms utilize gamification, AI-powered expert locators, and digital badges to recognize contributions.
Digital badges.
Yes, and they are empirical successes. TCS saw 12% higher retention rates among participants, and Infosys saw a 16% higher retention rate.
Okay, but
Wait, they literally estimate saving over 2 million hours annually just by using AI to connect people who would never have organically met. At scale, relational architecture has to be engineered.
that is an impressive scale, and I acknowledge the short-term metrics. But we have to look at the psychological depth of those gamified platforms.
What do you mean?
We are bumping into social exchange theory here.
Okay,
Basically, this theory explains that human beings subconsciously weigh the social costs and benefits of every interaction. If I help you with a coding problem because we are colleagues, that builds relational trust, right? That's a social reward.
right.
But if you introduce a digital badge, you're changing the math from a social reward to an economic one. A digital badge turns knowledge sharing into a transaction.
I don't know if it's purely economic.
Once the novelty of the badge wears off, or if the algorithm changes, the behavior stops because the intrinsic motivation has been corrupted. I advocate instead for distributed leadership and continuous learning systems that naturally normalize gaps in knowledge without gamifying them.
Like what?
Consider Intuit's failure parties, where teams explicitly celebrate experiments that generated learning despite failing, or Google's famous 20% time, giving employees unmanaged time to explore.
Okay.
When employees have collective accountability and dedicated unmanaged time, psychological safety thrives naturally because ownership is distributed to the employee, not dictated by an algorithm handing out gold stars.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning, because an Intuit failure party is ultimately just a highly choreographed corporate ritual.
Choreographed?
Yeah. Isn't that precisely another form of top-down engineering of an emotional experience? The leadership team at Intuit is actively designing an event to manipulate the corporate culture.
I wouldn't call it manipulation.
Furthermore, Google's 20% time requires a massive structural allowance within the organization's resource planning. A manager has to formally authorize that 20% of productive capacity is redirected.
Yes, but
I argue that you are pointing to successful structural engineering and labeling it organic simply because the outcome feels pleasant to the employee.
it is fundamentally different because of where the locus of control resides.
Locus of control.
Yes. In an AI gamified system, the platform controls the interaction. It dictates who is an expert, it measures the output, and it assigns the reward.
Sure.
In an environment that dedicates unmanaged time, the organization provides the resource, which is the time, but the employee retains the locus of control over how that time is used, who they connect with, and what knowledge they pursue.
Right.
That is why it maps so perfectly onto the job demands resources model. To define that briefly, the model says workplace stress is a balancing act.
Okay.
You have job demands that drain you and job resources like autonomy or supportive colleagues that recharge you. Unmanaged time is a massive resource that buffers against the demands of the job.
Okay, I follow that.
A gamified leaderboard is often just another demand. It creates a dynamic where, if I am not accumulating knowledge points, I am falling behind my peers. That induces stress, which is the exact opposite of psychological safety.
But let's ground this in a real human scenario.
Okay.
Imagine being a new hire right now. You're sitting alone at your kitchen table. Your code just broke. And your only lifeline is a directory of 30,000 strangers on Slack or Teams.
Yeah, that's daunting.
You are terrified of looking stupid. In that moment, organic emergence is completely useless to you. Locus of control does not help you figure out who to ask.
Well,
You need the AI expert locator. You need the formal mentoring program. The research is clear that departing employees take with them knowledge worth 1.5 to 2 times their annual salary. We cannot afford to let that new hire flounder in the dark hoping they organically bump into the right mentor.
I see your point.
The systemization of knowledge networks, even if it starts out somewhat transactional, builds the multiplicity over time. The badge or the algorithm initiates the conversation, but the human beings continue it.
I will concede that the initial connection might require a nudge, especially in remote settings where proximity is zero.
Right.
But when we rely entirely on the system, we treat human beings like nodes in a server network. The Panda research doesn't focus on objective network structures, meaning it doesn't care who connects to whom on a spreadsheet.
Yes, it's perceptual.
It focuses entirely on the perceptual dimension. Do I feel valued? Do I feel supported? An AI locator can definitively tell me who has the information, but it cannot make me feel safe enough to admit to that senior expert that I am totally lost. That requires an environment where leaders naturally model humility, where mistakes are casually accepted as part of the daily process, and where I know my colleague as a whole person, not just a skill profile on a company directory. Over-engineering connection risks turning every informal chat into a transactional performance.
So if we pull all of this together, it seems like we fundamentally agree on the core problem identified in the Panda et al. 2026 study. Knowledge management without a robust relational and emotional infrastructure is doomed to fail.
Completely agree. You can't just build a wiki and expect retention.
Right. We also agree that in the modern workplace, characterized by rapid technological obsolescence and hybrid work, psychological safety is the absolute key to retaining top talent.
Without a doubt.
My position remains that leaving this relational foundation to serendipity is a massive failure of leadership. The sheer scale and geographical distribution of today's workforce absolutely require formal architecture.
Well,
Structured routines, digital community cultivation, and explicit inclusive leadership systems are the necessary scaffolding. Without this engineered grid, professional isolation takes over, fear sets in, and the tacit organizational knowledge simply walks out the door.
And while I acknowledge that certain structural tools like dedicated time or basic communication platforms provide a helpful baseline, my position is that psychological safety is deeply subjective and incredibly fragile.
Fragile, yeah.
Organizations must leave room for proximity, unmanaged time, and freedom from continuous evaluation. If we over-engineer connection, we strip away the authenticity required for genuine vulnerability.
We turn informal collaboration, which is the absolute lifeblood of innovation, into a forced march. To retain the best minds, organizations must cultivate an environment where relational safety emerges organically, trusting their people to build the networks they need.
It is a profound tension between corporate design and organic emergence, and the stakes for the modern work environment couldn't be higher.
Absolutely.
The source material offers incredibly rich insights into these dynamics, particularly how they intersect with the job demands resources model we discussed and social capital theory.
Right. The idea that the actual value of your organization isn't in its patents or its servers, but in the invisible web of relationships and goodwill between your people.
Exactly. We highly encourage our listeners to dive deeper into the Panda study and Westover's analysis to fully grasp the complexity of this talent churn crisis.
Absolutely. There is so much more to explore regarding how our subjective experiences and daily interactions shape our professional loyalties.
The question remains for every listener evaluating their own workplace right now. When you look around at the networks connecting your teams, do you need a more precise architectural blueprint to bridge the gaps? Or do you need to tear up the blueprints entirely to let something genuine grow in the dark?